Welcome to lesson 14 of Investigating Science, Module 1 and 2. And in this lesson, we're going to be looking at observing patterns in data. So, the first activity I want you to do is this do now. So, I want you to see how many faces you can see in this picture and record that down. So, pause the video now to do that. Okay, so your answers that you have there are based on pareidolia, which is a tendency to see faces in otherwise random objects or things. And it's an evolutionary hardwiring that our brain has to detect patterns. And we're going to be looking at patterns to answer the inquiry question: how does humans' ability to recognize patterns affect the way they interpret data? And we're going to be looking at animal migration, and we're going to be looking at the Aurora Australis in our answers here. And so we can see our learning intention to explain how regular and irregular data can be tracked and analysed for patterns. So we're going to be proposing some hypothesis, explaining, looking at examples of animal behaviour, um, of sharks and how that's influenced by climate change. And then we're going to be looking at patterns observed over time through the universe, and then describing an aurora. So, like we said, to answer the do now, humans are psychologically primed to recognize patterns. And the ability to recognize patterns in animal tracks, the sudden flight of prey when they detect a predator, and the seasons are all patterns that, if the human brain was unable to recognize these, could cost early humans their life. The recognition of these patterns helps to build a body of evidence that's needed to support scientific conclusions in experiments. However, sometimes our brain makes patterns out of information that isn't always there. One of the examples we're going to be looking at is animal migration. Migration, we can read this here and you can pause it to read, but it's the forms of animals' journeys. So sometimes moving from east to west or complex round trips on land and ocean, sometimes up and down mountains. And it's movement typically involving from traveling from one habitat to another. And there are lots of reasons why animals migrate. It is an adaptive response to the season or to geographical variation in the provision of resources that that species of animal might need. Sometimes the annual cycle of the seasons produces large difference in solar energy in each hemisphere. So that's why we see some species moving due to the seasons. And it allows them to take advantage of food and weather conditions that are only available for certain times of the year. Migration is studied in a number of ways depending on the species that we're looking at. So, bird banding is one way, and obviously, looking at how birds move. Radars, sometimes we can tag animals with tracking devices such as satellite transmitters or GPS tags. And then sometimes we can look at stable isotopes and how they move across the world to look at migration. And the example we have here is the flight tracks of 9 birds, okay, and how they flew to and from Alaska, to and from New Zealand, okay, stopping in Alaska, and this was them tracked with satellite transmissions, which is how we've been able to depict their journeys here. So you can pause the video now and watch this video, and it's looking at and it explains how there's been a change in shark migration patterns over time, and it's due to climate change. So they're thinking that warmer water has been an influence in this. So pause the video now to watch this. The next activity we're going to complete in our workbook is a rigorous reading activity of the article about how marine trackers show how warming waters affect sea life in Australia and beyond. So making sure you're using the annotation symbols to read through the text. And then we see there are 4 levels this time: literal, words we don't know, our author's purpose, and inferential questions. So make sure you pause the video now to complete this activity. First thing I want you to do when we get onto this side, we're going to start looking at Aurora Australis, which is an example of an irregular pattern. So there's a video that's linked here that you can watch that explains what is an aurora. Following this activity in your document, there are 5 multiple choice questions and 4 open-ended questions. So I'm just going to go back and quickly look at the Aurora Australis here, and we can see that TED videos. Okay, so it's quite dramatic, but it does explain what an aurora is and why it would be depicted as an irregular pattern. So make sure you've watched that video, and you can watch it in your own time. I won't play it for you on this recording, but make sure you pause it so you can answer those questions there. And the last thing, I want you to update your inquiry question log. So, how does humans' ability to recognize patterns affect the way that they interpret data?